Really great to be here, and thank you, Lori, and thank you for everybody for coming in here today. And Luke and Jenny, really enjoyed your talk. It really intersects, I believe, with what we're going to talk about, diversity and inclusion. But I'll start. My name is Kent Williams. I'm assistant professor in the Rowe School of Business. I am alum. I'm Commerce 89, so it's really great to be part of this 100 years of commerce celebration. I got to be in the last couple of years of the old drafty commerce building. The students today had this luxurious Rowe School of Business, or Faculty of Management, where the Faculty of Management is. So quite lucky. Probably a lot of you alumni will remember that drafty. It was part gallery, part drafty building, but it was an interesting place to take our classes on those squeaky old wooden floors. But anyhow, today I'm going to sprint through and really go from a high-level view of talking about diversity, more from an abstract. I'm a social scientist, so I'm going to wade in and give some of my thoughts of diversity. How diversity, we have and I'm going to look at it from the past, present, and future. And if we look at diversity, it's created a really messy world with a lot of conflict and challenges for us. But also, I want to position that it's a real opportunity for us, and there's these creative nodes or portals of opportunity that really intersects with what Luke and Jenny were talking about. So there will be some commonality there. And then my wonderful colleague, Dr. Shkurska, is going to present more of a concrete perspective on how do we start doing diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So I'm going to just take a moment to share my screen here. Hopefully everybody can see that. So really, I titled this Diversity Leaning into Polarity to Open Creative Portals of Understanding. So yeah, again, I want to talk about what a great opportunity diversity is for us to really move towards social innovation and about co-creating the world anew. And working with the students at the Rowe School of Business, I see this where they're really starting to get to see that diversity is a real opportunity, and I think that bodes well for the future. So I think it's a really exciting time, as challenging as it is a time. I think it's a very exciting time for emerging leaders. And a lot of times we use diversity to check a box, but again, I'm going to position that it's a real opportunity for us. And also, I want to start out, we recognize that Dalhousie sits on the ancient and sacred land of Mi'kmaq. And I think Indigenous knowledge frameworks are part of this idea of diversity and what we need to tap into. And this idea of Mitakayu Oyasin, this is a Lakota saying, and it's really about we are all related. And this is a beautiful thing with Indigenous knowledge frameworks. It really recognizes the interconnectedness of all life on the planet. And I think this is really important. I think that from a Western capitalist culture, we've really dulled our senses and have really come at things from an individualistic, one world approach. And I think we have to ask, what is the opportunity cost of this approach that we've had? Now, I want to take us, being an abstract view, I want to take it even further back from a systems perspective. I don't know if anybody knows what this image is, if there's any astronomers out there. I come from a family of astronomers. This was a photograph taken from Voyager 1 in 1990, and that small pale blue dot is planet Earth. And I just want to share the words from the late, great Carl Sagan. He said of this, he said, "Look again at that dot. That's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. And he goes on to really paint the picture that what does it mean to be human? We're all living, traveling through space on this living planet, and we're in it together. So what does it mean to be human? But also he points to the conceit and the conflict that we have with one another, that we don't take up this connection of what it means to be human. And we have a long history of conflict with one another through our differences, this idea of diversity. So that's kind of part of our history. And so I think we have to really consider what it means to be human. And I think that if you looked at the planet Earth from space and you were just looking at it from a human relationship standpoint, it might look something like this. And that really recognizes that we are interconnected in who we are. And if you understand, and that could be another whole topic, but we come from supernovas, and we're made up of atoms that we have shared through our histories. And we really are interconnected and intertwined and indivisible on this planet. And I think we sometimes forget this. Culture really holds us in this individualistic or ego in our identities that really creates this difference. And we really see ourselves different from one another. And we are. I think that is one of the beautiful things about human beings. We have this creative imagination, and we are unique in our beings, but we sometimes forget that we are interconnected in what it means to be human. And I love, one of my mentors from afar is the late great David Bohm, the quantum physicist, and he has these wonderful dialogues with a guy named Krishnamurti, and they talk all about things like this. And one of the things they talk about is the human paradox, that really recognizes that human beings, we are nothing but change. This idea of, we know from a physical standpoint, our body changes its atoms every 7 years. So our physical makeup changes day by day, and even our mental models change moment to moment. But what in their conversations that really struck with me is that we need to recognize that human thought and knowledge is limited. Our truth and how we see the world, and Jenny and Luke talked a little bit about biases. We fabricate our world and our truths based on our biases and our assumptions that we show up. And we have to understand that we can never get the full reality or totality of any one experience. Just like when you go away from this conversation and you share the talk with somebody, it's going to be from your biased lens, and you're never going to ever able to capture that moment. But one of the things as well with limited thought, it leaves us vulnerable. And what we do is we turn to tribes and groups to get security. And as we know from Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we've learned in psychology, that one of the bottom rungs is this idea of security. So this starts to divide us of this idea of what it means to be human. And we need to recognize that. And even, in art, the French artist, René Magritte, he acknowledged this in some of his art, this one famous one, "This is not a pipe." And it just really suggests that we all see the world from a different lived experience. We all have unique lives and see the world differently. And with this brings differences. And a lot of times we will even die over these differences, as we know from our history. And it's only with globalization and technology, our world has only got more, we've only seen more complexity, this rapidly changing world of complexity, and this, what we could call this mad world that we live in. And we never often talk about the population challenge that we have. You look back 221 years ago, it was only 1 billion people on the planet. And now we're at 7.8 billion people on the planet. And National Geographic says by 2040, we're going to hit 9 billion people on the planet. So it's beautiful. And in some ways, if you flip it, you could say, wow, that's a lot of diversity to tap into, a lot of room to innovate and have social entrepreneurship. But also, it also brings us in our tribes, and it can create more conflict as we fight for resources and space. So we recognize that we live in turbulent times, and the pandemic is a fine example, a key mark of our time right now. And with this, we know that human beings, leaders, we show up in our pattern ways of doing things. And the complexity of mind is not keeping pace to the rapidly changing world. And this is creating challenges for us. And we can look at some of the societal grand challenges like climate change, poverty, inequality, conflict, our pandemic, loss of biodiversity. And, you know, I have a list here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but some of the consequences of our modern way of constructing the world, the challenges are great. And some of the other key ones to mention is we know we've gone into the 6th period of mass extinction, the last one being the dinosaur. But with the increasing population, it's putting tremendous pressure on the biosphere. And so the loss of biodiversity is a real concern. And as E.O. Wilson out of Harvard says, the famous biologist, that our lifeline really is the biodiversity of our planet. And also we see inequality, that the gap keeps on growing between the haves and have-nots, with 1% of the population owning over 50% of the wealth. And we know that we're moving outside of the planetary boundaries that really support viable life on the planet. And we've moved into this suggested epoch of the Anthropocene, where human influence is omnipresent. And really, we're a geophysical force, and we're affecting things on the planet to the detriment. And so this is putting tremendous pressure on our planet and really causing challenges for human development and creating challenges that we've never faced before. And so also I think it recognizes, and I talk about this with my students, is that we are leaving our emerging leaders in a really tough place. They're being left with a tough legacy. And again, as far as leaders, we're reacting to these challenges with old models, old ways of being, acting out of fear, and really it's being shown to be not effective. So as Einstein says, we can't solve old problems with the thinking we used to create them. And as Levine says, what kind of thinking can embrace chaos without falling into despair? So I think this really brings me to the last part that I want to share, is just this idea of leaning into the polarity or the diversity that we have to really find these creative portals, how we can create the world anew. And it really connects to a lot what Luke and Jenny was saying. So again, kind of going back to that photograph that I had of the networks of human relationships. And this is how we show up. We are these networks of relationships. And so there are these complex adaptive systems that connect in relationality and communality. And what I would say, it's like this, we have this power of collective human intelligence available of us for us to tap into, to have these new seeds of emergence to create the world anew. So what are some of these portals? And I think it's about having some mind shifts, disrupting some of these old colonial ways of how we've seen the world. And one is how we look at the world that we live in, you know, the natural world. We have, from a Cartesian Newton perspective, we really have seen ourselves as being outside of nature. And I think that we have to really shift that, have a radical shift, and really understand that we are of nature, that we are interconnected to all life on the planet. And also, I think that we have to radically open ourselves up to some of these new frameworks that are being presented, like the UN SDGs, and also the ideas of the planetary boundaries, so that we can respond to challenges that consider human rights, and also living within the means of our planetary boundaries. Also, there's this other area, new emerging area called the relational turn. A lot of times we talk about things from a systems perspective, and the relational turn is even a shift away from that. It's looking at how we sense the world from being in it. And this has a lot to do with design thinking, of really using an ontological lens that opens us up to novel ways of knowing, being, and doing in the world. And we're starting to see that in research and practice, this idea of being coming from a place in the world and really understanding how problems and challenges are unfolding in local networks and how do they relate from a global perspective. Also, I think Indigenous knowledge frameworks is really important. We recognize a lot of times we are doing the reconciliation work, but I think that there's a real opportunity to welcome Indigenous knowledge frameworks into our Western frameworks that we use. And really they recognize the interdependence of all life on the planet, and also this idea of reciprocity, which I think is so key. And also this idea, which was talked about in a somewhat way in Jenny and Luke's talk, this idea of multiple worldviews. And I love Escobar's work where he talks about the owning and living in a pluriverse, that we need to open ourselves up to multiple worldviews to open up new possibilities of achieving the unthinkable and unachievable. A lot of times we've just come at things at a one Western view, which have only limited us in how we move forward on the planet. And then I think using tools like the art of dialogue. And dialogue is this art of sensing together. It's very different from discussion, which comes from the same root as concussion and percussion, meaning to win an argument. Dialogue is about listening deeply to that polarity where other people are coming from, listening to the differences to find shared meaning. And it's something that I work with all my students about, working around dialogue. And I think it's such a radical shift from how we've been teaching our students in the past. And then finally, I think that we need to look at common ways of bringing diversity and cultures together. And I think art is one of those areas that's recognized as a common thread that can bring us together. As I love this quote, art is the human DNA outside of the body. It's the human language that interconnects us all. And lastly, before I hand over to Oksana, I just want you to really think about imagining desired futures that are underpinned by fairness, prosperity, and sustainability. I think it's important that we think about, when we were thinking about co-creating a new world, these desired futures, that we think about this idea of fairness, prosperity, and sustainability, and really connect to what it means to be human. And I think that we have to imagine and not get stuck always in our problems, but to really imagine what the world we want to live in together, and what might this look like. And so I leave with this metaphorical canvas for you to start imagining. And with that, hopefully I didn't go too much over, Oksana. So I welcome you to, I'll stop sharing and welcome you in.
Thank you, Kent, for such a beautiful message about diversity. Hello, everyone. My name is Oksana Shkurska. Unfortunately, I'm not a DAL alumnus, but I am an immigrant from Ukraine. I've been with DAL for 8 years, and 5 of these years I have spent them with the Faculty of Management and the Bachelor of Commerce program in particular. So my message today will complement Ken's message about diversity, and I will talk about diversity from an organizational perspective. Hopefully, I will bring a new perspective, my cultural perspective, to this conversation as well. And I hope that it will enrich this wonderful conversation that we have already started. So I will also share my slides with you, and after my short presentation, we will have a conversation in small breakout rooms, and then Kent will wrap up this wonderful discussion. I hope it sounds good to you. How does it sound to you? Good?
I think it sounds great.
Yay, okay, perfect. So I hope you are able to see my presentation now. Just let me know if there are any technical issues. So as I said, I'm going to talk about diversity and inclusivity from an organizational perspective, and I will also talk about the connection between diversity, inclusivity, and innovation. So we already touched on some of these important points that I will mention in my presentation. So I just would like you to reflect more on these important things. So I will start with benefits of diversity. I will share some research results with you, not my research, but overall the research on diversity and inclusivity and how diversity and inclusivity are connected with innovation. So this will be my second part. And then we will talk about fostering inclusive organizational culture. And that's very important as well. So let's start with benefits of diversity. So why diversity? Why do we talk so much about it? Oops, sorry. Why diversity is so important for organizations? To complement Ken's message, again, I will look at what research says. So diversity brings higher employee engagement and improved performance to organizations. As a result of this, increased employee retention. Innovative ideas just thrive, and there is boosted creativity. It brings competitive advantage, and as a result, it brings market growth. So these are the main benefits of diversity that are highlighted in literature from an organizational perspective. Just one sec. How is diversity connected with innovation? Again, research shows that companies with more balanced gender composition are more likely to innovate compared to companies with high concentration in one gender. Isn't it interesting? Companies with above average diversity produce a greater proportion of revenue from innovation than from companies compared with companies that with below average diversity. And we look at 45% versus 26% here, which is a big difference. Companies with two-dimensional diversity out-innovate and outperform others. What is this two-dimensional diversity? It is a combination of both inherent and acquired diversity. So inherent diversity, for example, you were born in another country, and acquired diversity, let's say you were on an exchange program and lived somewhere for 6 months and developed intercultural communication skills. So this is acquired diversity. So the companies that have both, a combination of both inherent and acquired diversity, out-innovate and outperform others. Again, it's very interesting, right? However, there are key points to consider here. Managing international diversity is as challenging as managing cross-national diversity. And this is what companies sometimes don't understand or don't take into consideration. So that's important to really understand the importance of this skill, the importance of understanding, again, how to manage diversity in such a way that it doesn't have the opposite effect. Because again, research shows that people at the top of organizations are saying all the right things relative to diversity, but their middle management who really run an organization, create this experience with people who work there, don't understand and don't feel accountable for diversity and inclusion. So that's also very important to take into consideration. So there is a need to decenter the focus of diversity management from a business imperative to an anti-discrimination and social justice imperative. And if left poorly managed, employee diversity is just the opposite, likely to increase turnover, misunderstandings, and conflicts instead of boosting creativity, market share, and competitive advantage. So once again, diversity without inclusivity do not boost innovation. So this is basically the success formula. Diversity and inclusivity go hand in hand, and innovation without diversity and inclusivity together is not possible. Why is it so important? Why is inclusivity important? Because if the work culture is not inclusive, diverse employees' voices are ignored, and all the new ideas that could move an organization forward, unfortunately, are ignored and they are not taken seriously. And this is, again, usually just because they do not fit into an existing cultural framework. So that's why people's voices are just not heard, right? And as a result of that, employees become disengaged and disinterested, and they just do not move their organization forward anymore. So how can companies foster this inclusive organizational culture? I'm sure you have your own thoughts about this, and we will ask you to share your thoughts at the end of this session. I just want to share some insights with you. So the first important thing that we should understand is that the organization should be open to diverse ideas that do not fit into an existing cultural framework. And this is a real challenge because all organizations have their own culture that just in most cases resonates with a national dominant culture. So that's why people are hired based on the cultural fit, right? And this is what prevents innovative ideas. This is what prevents diverse ideas, just because people with different worldviews, people with different perspectives just don't come to the organization. They're not hired, right? And so that's important for organizations to understand that if they want to have just a diversity of voices, a diversity of worldviews in the organization, they should stop hiring based on the cultural fit criterion. They should create safe environment for, again, proposing these new ideas, for sharing worldviews, and everybody should be heard. And that's also important to give credit to those who put forward new ideas, and people should be rewarded fairly. And here we move to the social justice imperative as well. What to do when the ideas are so diverse that it's hard to align them? Again, research shows that setting common goals really helps to align diverse perspectives, and then the teams become more integrated and they move their organization forward. And communication, this is a very important piece of this puzzle. Communication is often ignored, and I heard today some of the participants were talking about the leadership, just how important it is to clearly actually communicate the values of the organization. So the value of diversity and the value of inclusive culture should be communicated very clearly as well, so that people just understand how important both diversity and inclusivity are. And from the perspective of intercultural communication, we often say that leaders should have the skill, which is very important nowadays, the intercultural competence skill. However, intercultural competence is important, but what is even more important is cultural humility. And cultural humility is a little bit different from intercultural competence, because when we are talking about intercultural competence, we talk about learning about other cultures, about other worldviews, about how other people think, or what values they have. But when we are talking about cultural humility, we are talking about learning from other cultures. We are talking about learning from other worldviews, which is even more important. And also, cultural humility means our willingness to reflect on our own cultural values, our perceptions and biases. We talked about biases today as well. So cultural humility actually gives you this willingness and basically opportunity, because when you reflect all the time on your personal values, on your perceptions, and on then you will be able to identify your biases as well. And hopefully, as a result of all this reflection, we all will be willing to accept and appreciate differences, because without this, we will not be able to create the culture of inclusion and the culture of innovation. And one important thing to remember is that inclusivity is not a metric. Some organizations approach it as a metric. Its numbers are important, but inclusivity is a mindset. It is viewing other cultures as resources for insight and inspiration, and their members as willful agents. So when I wouldn't say better than these Japanese research in the field of intercultural communication, it's really, really important to understand that other cultures and other worldviews are resources for insight and inspiration. And if we build our culture, our organizational culture based on these important principles, then it will become really inclusive. So these are my thoughts and my insights. I will stop sharing my screen now.
That was great, Oksana. I love that whole idea of cultural humility. I was at a summit about a week and a half ago, and I heard this one speaker, David Abram, talk about, instead of calling this new epoch the Anthropocene, we should be calling it the Humilocene. And really that word comes from humus, or grounded in earth. So I really like how you talked about how we need to heighten cultural humility. That was an excellent point.